All right. Good evening, everybody. Good evening to you. Good evening to you. Good evening to everyone here. This is our third installment of Lights and Shadows. I just want to recap a little bit so that if anybody's watching for the first time, you have a little bit of a recap. You don't have to watch the other two installments. So my name is Doron Yitzchak. I'm a specialty coach, and I help people break through unconscious blockages or behavior loops or just general stuckness where something seems to be on repeat. I do this through accessing a part of the mind called the shadow, which is in the unconscious mind. And once inside there, identifying things that would otherwise be avoided unconsciously or denied unconsciously. You're not aware that you're denying this. It's just part of the structure of the psyche. And then once we tap into those specific aspects, then there's a purging of all of repressed pain. And after that contraction, there is a massive expansion, and that expansion is breakthrough, where people are able to break through income ceilings, break through relationship patterns, break through even chronic health stuff. So that's where I come from. Now, it dawned on me at some point early in my career when I saw that people would come into my process and have an increase in income pretty invariably. It's probably like the most consistent thing is an increase in income. It made me think and wonder, if income is something that is set on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, then what is it about my input that is having an effect on something, on an area that the Torah actually doesn't give any clues or hints or instructions? This is how you make more money, or this is how you have better health, or this is how you're able to get into relationships. It doesn't say that. In fact, what it says in the Zohar is Banai, Chaya, Mazonai. That's sort of these three areas. Banai is my children, that's intimate relationships. Chaya is my life, it's chronic health. And Mazonai is my food, it's my sustenance, it's my income. Banai, Chaya, Mazonai. Lo b'milta talia, meaning it's not dependent on a specific thing. A milta is like a davar. It's not a specific thing that you do or thing that you say. Ela b'mazal talia. It's dependent on mazal. So we're not going to talk right now about what mazal is. It's people that don't understand it translate it as luck, but you can translate it as zodiac. I believe that you can also translate it as vibration. Because when you change certain things in your life, and there's this core change to how you feel about yourself and to how you calibrate yourself in your own life, there is a change in the energy that you are emitting, and we'll call that vibration. Anyway, it would seem that the sequence of this healing process, it seems to be very correct, not just on a human level because the results are there, but also on a Torah level because income does go up, healing does take place. Things that seem insurmountable, they disappear like they weren't there. So what I've been done is that what's happened is I've been invited by Shlomo to this platform to share what I have found in the Torah that has to do with shadow. And it's very, very deep stuff. It's very, very deep stuff. So as I shared it in the very first installment, is that shadow is how there was a transference or a transformation, a stage flow, if you will, from singularity to duality. Because the singularity that was this massive one light that was everywhere, that there was nothing, there was no space or no opportunity, there was no existence of anything else because nothing could stand in its space besides the fact that there was no room for anyone else. And we go from a singularity to duality by shadow, because something has to obstruct the light ultimately. If there was only light and now there's something there that's obstructing it, that means that something else would have to come. So shadow implies moving from a duality to a singularity. We have a part of our mind that is unconscious, that is part of the duality of consciousness, is that there is a part of the mind that is conscious, part of the mind that is unconscious. And it is in this unconscious part of the mind that a duality happens within the human psyche. What that means is that while I think that I am becoming or behaving like a certain version of myself, my light self-image, like if you think of yourself, you don't think of yourself as a villain. You don't think of yourself as someone not good. You usually think of yourself as someone good. You dress according to that self-image. You buy a house according to the self-image. You buy a car according to that self-image. Everything stems from that sense of self. The thing is that it's the light self-image. And because we live in a world of duality, that means that there is a shadow self-image. And that shadow self-image is basically go to the person that likes you the least and ask them what they have to say about you. And they will give you what would be in your own eyes a shadow description of you. So there's some place that you show up your best, and the people that love you will tell you about that. And then maybe even the same people, they see you sometimes not at your best, and they'll give a different version of you. So those are your two selves. Those are your zeh l'umat zeh, your light self and your shadow self. And because one of the designs of this world is photosynthesis, that things gravitate towards the light, that means that there is a gravitation away from the darkness. What this means for humans is that whether you know it or not, you are in denial of your own shadows. Me too. We're in denial of our own shadows because there is a gravitation by design from the darkness to the light. So we're focusing on the light and not only not focusing on the darkness, but even denying it, because there could be proof that you behave not in a good way. But until you can own your own worst self, until if you behave in a way that someone may deem you to be a monster, if you cannot own your own monster, you are always going to be haunted, so to speak, or subject to the manifestation of that suppressed part of the self. Okay, so that is the basis of human inquiry in terms of the shadow. And what I'd like to speak about now is the role that shadow plays in the greater topic of human consciousness, where it came from originally, and what are the implications of shadow because it comes from such a high place. So, the way you say shadow in Hebrew is tzel, tzadik lamed. And if you pay attention, now that I've mentioned it to you, when you're davening, you will find many parts of the tefillah, many parts of the prayers that have the word tzel. I'll just give you a few. Those that put on a talis in the morning, betzel knafecha nechesayun. In the shade of your wings, we will take cover. Betzel shakai yitlonan. In the tzel of shakai, he will sleep or he will dwell. Hashem tzilcha al yad yaminecha. Hashem is your tzel, your shadow on your right hand. In Anim Zmirot, nafshi chamda betzel yadecha ladat kol raz sodecha. So there is all of this mention of tzel, and it's so easy to have normalized this thing called shadow that we don't really know. A person would have no impetus to look and see what is the significance of shadow, when in our minds the given context of shadow simply means an obstruction of light. So as I mentioned in previous installations, that there was also, like the word cell, the word cell, shadow, because it's two letters, it can be a shoresh. And so the first spiritual world, where there's no separation, there's a world of atzilut, which is emanation, but again the shoresh of atzilut is cell. The shoresh of tselem, we're made in the tselem Elokim, the shoresh of tselem is cell. Chava was taken from Adam's tsela, that's also the cell, same as tselem. Betzalel knew things that Moshe didn't know that weren't written anywhere. There's this concept, there's this patternist concept. It's a consistent one of Tzel showing up in really significant places. Okay, so there's something else about Tzel, that it's also the shoresh of the word Hatzalah, right, which means to save or to rescue. So where would we see this as like a practical application? Like, where would I require rescuing specifically with shade? Well, let's say if I was in the desert and there was this boiling, scorching sun, shade could be the difference between life and death for me. But what would it be saving me from?
From the light.
From the light. The saving, the giving of shade, the hatzalah, is from the light. because the light is too bright. Now that's in this manifested world. Imagine what happens in the spiritual world. So in the spiritual world, it says that the tzaddikim in Gan Eden, they nehenim miziv hashchina, atarot beroshehem v'nehenim miziv hashchina, that the tzaddikim sit with these type of crowns on their heads, and they enjoy the ziv, which is like the ray of the shechina. But there's something else that happens in Shamayim, is that the neshama gets enclosed in something called levushim, which are garments. Now, why would it be necessary for a neshama to have garments?
Because it'll be too intensive
What
for him.
What would be too intense?
Being so close to Hashem.
Right. So there is a light. There is a light that is so bright that the neshama requires hatzalah. So it is the levush, the garment, that is providing that shade, that hatzalah. Because if you look if you pick up your hand, the light that's on the exposed part of your body, there's light on it, but then from wherever your clothes are, that part of your body is in shade. Okay? So it says in Chassidus, I remember in one of the Rebbe Sichos, but it was quoted throughout other Lubavitcher Rebbeim also, is that the mitzvahs in their entirety are called levushim, but they're also called tzel. That the mitzvahs are actually called tzel. Why? For this reason here exactly, is that when you do a mitzvah, you get a levush. Once the levush has been created, it cannot be uncreated. If you do an avera, then it gets stained, and there's a way you've got to have it purified, and that's where tshuva comes in. But the levush, once it's there, it's there. And why is it there? In order to give that necessary saving for the actual neshama because of the light that is too great.
Could you say that as you do a mitzvah, you naturally get close to God, and therefore you need the levush, which is the mitzvah itself? Is there some sort of gilgul there?
So everything about this world is anything but linear. Everything is very multidimensional. I think Kal Vachomer, the multi levels of where and how mitzvahs turn into useful things and in different dimensions. I'm sure that there is a connection or a parallel. To answer your question about whether it's a person feels closer to Hashem, I personally believe that, we know that doing a mitzvah is not just like mitzvah from the language of commandment, like mitzuveh, but rather from the word tzevet, from letzavet, which means to team up or to connect. So by doing a mitzvah, we're actually connecting to Hashem, and that's the mila of this world of Asiyah, is that in the higher worlds, no action can be done, therefore no mitzvah can be done. So it's in this world where we actually get to connect to Hashem. Now, does that mean that a person feels closer to Hashem? I think that personally that a level of understanding is required. I think that the whole lattice and the whole greater picture of Torah is there in order for a human being to develop the correct model of reality of how this world actually runs, and then depending on their capacity to learn nistar and to learn mystical things, how the outer worlds are like the source of the seen worlds. So I think basically to answer your question, I personally believe that a person can do mitzvahs and not feel so connected, depending on, some people would say, how much klipa is on their soul. But I think that an understanding of it raises a person's connection. And it says mitzvah goreret mitzvah, so the more a person does a mitzvah, at some point they'll probably find something that deepens the meaning. Thank you for the question. But coming back to the subject of Tzel and its divinity. So the world of Atzilut, which is the world of emanation, which is the world where everything emanates from. It's the highest worlds. I mean, that are sort of manifested or created. There are other things beyond Atzilut. But for the sake of this discussion, if you think of an obstruction of light, so there'll be, let's say, a light source over here, and then there's an obstruction of the light. What happens on the other side of the obstruction of the light is there are two things. There is the actual shadow, which is exactly underneath the obstruction, and then there is the shape that we see on the ground. And that's actually not the shadow, that's the cast of the shadow. What it's called in Hebrew, it's surah. So it says Hashem yatzar et ha'adam, b'tselem dmut, we say in the Sheva Brachas, Asher yatzar et ha'adam b'tselmo, b'tselem dmut tavnito. So the word tselem speaks about the tzel of mem, and mem, if you look at it, is a chaf and a vav that comes together. So a lot of people say that the actual tavnit, the stencil of man, is drawn out from the shadow of Yud Kei Vav Kei, which is Tselem Adam, just an interesting thought. So far so good, everyone? Mm-hmm. Right? That we enter into duality through shadow. What that means for us human beings is that if we can remove shadow through becoming aware of our own self, if we can remove shadow, then we go from a singularity back into from a duality back into a singularity. I believe that when it says in Daniel, "V'tir behadat," it says that in the time of Mashiach, "V'tir behadat," that da'at, which is perception or consciousness, "V'tir be," it will increase. "V'tir be" is also a gematria Taryag 613, just very interesting. But that there will be this ascension of consciousness and das of Hashem, that there's the shadow, the part of myself that is the negative, or that I deem to be negative, and I'll explain what I mean by deem to be negative, that there's no longer this aversion. It's a hiskalelus. There's an inter-inclusion of myself and all of myself. Now, for the parents, it'll be easy for me to say, if let's say you've got 4 kids, and one of them is like not whatever word you want, not okay, not right, not good, not just basically different to the others. Does that child deserve any less love? Probably not. In fact, it would probably be better to give that child more love. So a parent can understand this inter-inclusion of the so-called bad and good, right? Which is the duality I'm going to speak about now. But to understand inter-inclusion, that if I can give to my own self all parts of me love and compassion the way that I give to someone else, then what the result would be that I would stop seeing that part of me in someone else. Right? The Baal Shem Tov says that if you see something in someone else, it's because it exists inside of you. It's very true, because it's called projection, although it's completely unconscious. So the way to use this in terms of a process of self-inquiry is that if there are people that are getting on your nerves, take one specifically, and this person's getting on your nerves, and then you look at the judgment. I judge the person did X, Y, and Z, but I judge that person to be, and then a judgment. That judgment is usually the projection. And then you can look in your own self and find where that judgment is true, and you've got to be really honest and brutally honest with yourself. So where did this whole duality, where did this sort of come from in consciousness? This is really fascinating. So it came in the Garden of Eden. What happened? There was a transgression. So I spoke about this in previous sessions, that everything stems from the negative. There has to be a negative imprint. There always has to be a contraction first, and then from that contraction there is an expansion. But the point is that there's got to be an imprint. I'm just going to sidetrack now and hope that I remember that to come back exactly where I was. It says about Yaakov and Esav that they were both in the womb. Because they're both in the womb, they are our archetypal characters of good and bad, because they were twin brothers and they occupied the same womb. It says about Yaakov that Yaakov was an ish tam. What does tam mean? Tam could mean perfect, it could mean innocence, but basically what it means untainted, is what tam means. Something that is clean and untainted. So the question gets asked, I can't remember where I heard this. I think it was with the Chavrusa learning Torah Or, that the fact that Rivka got Yaakov to trick his father And all of this happened, and yes, it was guided, and yes, it was a nevuah, and yes, it needs to be done like that. But why like that specifically? Because if you think about it, Yaakov didn't sort of like do it and then was completely okay with himself for the rest of his life. I tricked my father, and I'm like, it was good, it was everything, so now I'm completely okay with that. It was no. Rivka saw with Ruach HaKodesh that it had to be done in a way that left him scarred, that left him remorseful for something that he had done, something that he would feel guilty for, something that would take that tam and give it a polarity, because it had no polarity. And it was only once he was able to do that he was able to like go into the world, go live with Lavan's place, because he had become not like his tam had been humanized, and he could then he could then go into his true power, because it wasn't just one-sided. It wasn't just a singularity. He would have a duality. And then where do we see this ultimately manifesting? Is that Yaakov fought with the Satan. Now, it says in the Mikra that Vayivater Yaakov, Vayivater levado, Vayivater hu levado, I think. Anyway, Vayivater Yaakov levado, that he was left by himself. And this place of self is basically, he did his own introspection. In the same pasuk it says, and then he fought with an ish, that he fought with someone. So the commentaries say that this was Esav's, who's the archetypal evil. This is his angel, so it would naturally be the angel of evil. And then Yaakov fought with this part of himself. It was his own projection. It was his own self. And then he subdued it, and he integrated it, because it wasn't enough to just beat the Satan. He said, now bless me. Now bless me. And so what did the Satan do? He then took the tam and kept the tam, but like turned it to the max, and says, now you're no longer going to be Yaakov, which says that Yaakov was Ish Tam. Now you're going to be Israel only. Only.
I thought as well.
No, Hashem later on said you're going to have both. But it was when the angel blessed him, it says your name will now be Israel only. Okay, implying that there was only a place of this expansion. There was only a place of this positive polarity, let's call it. Only a singularity that was only good. Li Rosh, Yashar Kel. But the truth of the matter is that Yaakov, which is the Yud of Akeb, it's the lower point, whereas Li Rosh is the Yisrael, the Otiot Li Rosh is the higher point. In order for him to be complete, there had to be this duality of the Yaakov and the Yisrael, the lower part and the higher part. And on that specific note, the gematria of Yaakov plus the gematria of Satan equals the gematria of Yisrael. How mind-blowing is that?
Wow.
That in order for him to complete himself and to become Yisrael, he had to deal with his own other side. And that's basically where shadow work, as a process of self-inquiry, how that fits into our lives as humans, and this is like the archetypal place and source in the Torah, which is really awesome. Coming back to what I was going to say before about where the shadow shows in consciousness is moving from a singularity to a duality. Am I doing with time? Cool. I'll finish with this. It's just a nice way to understand how this duality thing happens. So when Adam was created, he was what we would call today enlightened. Okay, he was completely connected to nature, and just like animals that walk around without clothes and feel no shame, so too Adam and Chava walked around without clothes, because they had no separateness of identity. It was all part of the system. You know, if you look at tsunamis and these disasters that happen, with water specifically, it's only humans that get killed in these disasters, because the animals can sense that something's wrong, something's happening, and they just find higher ground. Why? Because they're connected to the system. They're connected to the system called Hateva, to Elohim, this 86. They're connected to it. So then there's no sense of separation. That's also why they don't take anything personally. They're not blaming anyone for anything. If they get into a fight and the dog gets maimed, he doesn't spend his life, resentful at the animal that maimed him. He just gets on with life, because there's no anger. It's all tzedek, right? So Adam and Chava, they were like that. And it was through the treachery, through the trickery of the Nachash, or whatever. But basically what needed to happen was that in order for humans to be as we are, in order for like the the inauguration, so to speak, if you want to call it that, of like how humans will now be, because there had to be this transference, just like shadow was the transference from singularity to duality. There had to be this transference between this godliness, this godly setup, and then the human story. And the way this happened was through sin, because there had to be a negative imprint. So what was it that Adam and Chava bit into? It was a fruit of duality. What was the name of the tree?
It's that.
Very good. So you said Eitz Hadat Tov Vara, but most people would say just Eitz Hadat, the tree of knowledge. And that's like calling Jonathan John. Okay, it's a shortening because the full name is Eitz Hadat Tov Vara. This is the tree of knowledge between, not just knowledge, I know stuff, but knowledge between good and bad. All right. Now it says in the Gemara that no bad comes from Shamayim. We say Hodel Hashem Kitov Ki L'olam Chasdo. There's no bad. Something that may seem din, may seem harsh, it's not bad. It's just it's going to take a bit of time for you to see the good. So if no bad comes, then how can there be Eitz Hadat Tov Vara? How can there actually be something that would lead a person to say this is good, this is bad? So this is a human thing, and this is you can call it the illusion, because the truth is Eitz Chaim, which is Emet Vasheker, just truth and false. They bit into a tree of duality that caused them to engage in a mental process that we can't really stop, and that is called judgment. Because if I know something to be good, and I know this to be good, I know this to be bad, who decided that? Who decided that this is good and this is bad? And yes, we have a rule book that tells us what is the right thing to do and what is the wrong thing to do. But if you know anyone that's ever kicked let's say a drug addiction, and they became very successful, and you go and you ask that person, would you have preferred your life without the addiction? They don't say yes. They say, no, it made me who I am, because there was a yerida they had to go through, a contraction, in order to have the aliyah. And so the right way, if you want to, I don't know if it's the correct word to use is right, but a human optimal way of looking at things is this thing here, does it serve me, does it not serve me? Does this serve me or does this not serve me? That's also to be taken with a pinch of salt, because people know how to self-govern, at least for the most part. So what I'll finish off with this is that the duality of minds that we live in, it happened because of the biting into a fruit of duality. What kick-started this duality in the mind? The process called judging. The process called judging. And that's why I said in the example that I gave before, is that if you can identify someone that is irritating you, making you angry, someone that you've condemned, someone that did something terrible, and just someone that's causing you some sort of charge, and you judge their behavior, like what type of person does what they did, and then you come up with a judgment, that judgment is the portal to your own self-inquiry of where you can find that judgment in yourself. And where is it lying? It's lying in the part of the mind called the shadow. And it is by the elimination of that, by this process of self-inquiry, that we move from a consciousness that is duality, conscious mind, unconscious mind, I'm good, I'm bad, to a consciousness of singularity where it's Ach Tov V'Chesed. So a lot to think about, a lot to chew on.
So can I invite you for a question for next week?
Sure.
The question I have is, could humanity have retained unity without having to go through the duality of eating from the tree? In other words, you're suggesting that because they ate from the tree, it's what eventually will allow them to go from duality to singularity. Did I understand you correctly? The
tree causes separation.
Yeah.
And in that separation, a function of that separation is this duality of mind, this conscious, unconscious, which basically means that I have to, because it got mixed, there's a pnimiyut to everything gets mixed. The good got mixed with the bad, and I need to do that birur. I need to be able to separate it, but in order to separate it, I've got to identify it within myself. Now, did it have to happen? Yes, in the master program of Yud and Hey and Vav and Hey, The Yud and Hey is a contraction, and the Vav and Hey is an expansion. So when Mashiach comes and when he says Bayom Hahu Yeh Hashem Echad U'Shmo Echad, that the world, the master program won't be Yud K, Vav K, contraction and expansion. It'll be Yud K, just a singularity, and it'll be a revealed good. And the evil, the concept of evil will be gone, which means that if you can fathom this, that we'll be able to expand without there being a contraction first.
That's really what I'm
Because on a level of neshama, chokhmah, which is expansive, tell me more, comes before bina. Wait, I've got to get my head around it. Chesed, which is like, I want to give you, it's love, comes before gvura, and netzach becomes before hod. So it's just in this manifested world that we've got to go through this contraction first and then expansion. But what's really going to happen, and the reality that we're going to be redeemed into, is that there's going to be a contraction. There's not going to be a place for contraction. Things will be able to expand without there being a contraction first.
Beautiful. Chazak u'baruch.